morning, good morning. Well, good afternoon. I always do that, don't I? It's afternoon. How is everyone today?
Great today.
Fine,
How are you? Yeah, good, Richard.
Yes, so today we have got a very interesting subject. We are going to be talking about strange beasts. And if I say and where to find them, we'll probably get sued by Harry Potter. But we are talking cryptids and strange unidentified animals that might exist all over the world that haven't been classified under the usual genus of zoologists so far. So we are being joined by Richard Freeman. Now, great bio. Cryptozoologist, I love that word, explorer and zoological director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. Former zookeeper, which we need to talk about. He has worked with over 400 species. Richard has hunted cryptids, unknown animals, all over the world, including the Tasmanian wolf, the giant anaconda, and the Mongolian deathworm. Now, that's the first one I want to know about, the Mongolian deathworm. It sounds amazing. We can talk about that at any point in your life. So any questions you might have about anything involving strange creatures? Have you seen, for example, any creatures such as anything from the Lochness Monster, the beast of Bodmin, to the Jersey Devil, which I've never heard of before, or even lucky enough to see any of the large ape-like, and you'll probably correct me on the expression, ape, any of the sort of humanid Homo erectus styles of Bigfoot or Yeti or any of those types? If you've ever been out in those areas where you may have seen something, do comment. If you've even sent us a picture that we could put up, or even if you want to come on and talk to us about your experiences, you can join us on the screen and it'll appear up here with us. So any questions you've got for Richard or myself or Lara, then do come on and talk to us. We would love to speak to you today. Please do share the feed. Have a look at the supernaturalmagazine.com. Any questions you do at all, come and talk to us. But we're going to go straight over to Richard. And Richard, what on earth allowed you to get into zoology?
Well, if you're talking about ordinary zoology as opposed to cryptozoology,
Well, let's start with ordinary zoology and then go on to the whole cryptid element of it.
Well, I was always interested in animals ever since I was a child. David Attenborough, I loved David Attenborough with Life on Earth, which was the seminal series from 1975, which I loved. I always had a great passion for animals. When I left school, I became a zookeeper. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the PG chimps from the adverts.
I do.
Yeah, well, I worked at Twycross Zoo where those chimps lived, and I was a trainee for a couple of years, and then I took over running the reptile house. So I've worked with animals on and off all my life.
Okay, and then why did you then move on to the sort of the more cryptozoology element of it in terms of strange creatures?
Once again, that can be traced back to my childhood, and I can answer that question in 3 words. Classic Doctor Who. As a kid, I grew up in the 1970s with John Pertwee as the Doctor. This is back in the days of real Doctor Who, before it became a ridiculous joke, a sort of woke, politically correct platform for virtue signalling, which makes me sick, and shame on the BBC for destroying their greatest franchise. But back in the 70s, it was genuinely frightening and dark and thought-provoking. And the third Doctor, played by John Pertwee, was incarcerated by the Time Lords on Earth. So the monsters he faced were in your backyard. So you had things like giant green maggots crawling out of a slag-eaten whale, and intelligent humanoid dinosaurs waking up after millions of years of hibernation to find that this upstart ape had taken over their planet. Things like that. It was incredibly compelling. So I became obsessed with strange creatures. And some of the things that the Doctor thought, like the Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti, were supposed to have real life analogues. So that got me interested in strange creatures. And years after I worked at the zoo, I was out looking for the beast of Bodmin Moor, one of the British big cats, and I stopped at a little museum called Potter's Museum of Curiosities at the Jamaica Inn on Bodmin Moor, sadly now defunct. And they had a little magazine called Animals and Men, which wasn't as rude as it sounded. It was about cryptozoology, and it was in the little gift shop. And I brought this magazine, read it, thought it was very good. It was published by this outfit called the Centre for Fortean Zoology. So I subscribed, and I started writing letters to them, and then I started writing articles. And then I went down and met the director, John Downs, and he said, look, when you're finished at university, come down and be our zoological director. So I did. I moved from Leeds to Devon, and from then on, I've travelled all around the world searching for mysterious creatures on virtually every continent except Antarctica.
Brilliant. So we are going to be talking about a lot of different creatures. You've given us a whole load of pictures that we can put up and talk about. And also we're going to be talking about your expedition to the Russian Caucasus, where you went searching for a particular creature. Now, how would you pronounce, I would say almasty or almasty?
Almasty.
Oh, new version, almasty, which you can talk to us all about. But did you want to start going through some of those pictures you sent through?
Yes, certainly, if you want.
Okay, so we start with this one.
That is Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans. He's the one on the left. He was a Belgian cryptozoologist, well, a Belgian zoologist, and together with another gentleman who we'll be seeing in a minute, Ivan T. Sanderson, he coined the word cryptozoology. It's from the Greek cryptid, meaning hidden, so it just means hidden zoology. And between them, Heuvelmans and Sanderson came up with the idea that a lot of the creatures we talk about in mythology and legend are probably based on real animals, just unknown to science. And he wrote a very groundbreaking book called On the Track of Unknown Animals, which looked at all over the world at reports of creatures unknown to science. A few years later, he published a marine equivalent called On the Track of, In the Wake of the Sea Serpents. So he's really the father of cryptozoology.
Ah, and then we've got this one.
That's Ivan T. Sanderson, and he's there with a ring-tailed lemur. Now, Ivan T. Sanderson was like the proto-David Attenborough. In the days before David Attenborough, he was a Scottish gentleman. This guy travelled all over the world studying animals, and then he moved to the States eventually, and he had a television show in the States. He run a little zoo, and together with Heuvelmans, he coined the term cryptozoology. But they were far from the first people to study it. They coined the word cryptozoology, but if you go back to 1886, there's a guy called Charles Gould who wrote a book called Mythical Monsters, in which he looked at things like dragons and unicorns and phoenixes, and he tried to work out whether these creatures could have been based on real animals. And for example, he writes several chapters on dragons, which are very interesting, and he postulates that the dragon may have been based on a gigantic species of monitor lizard unknown to science with a venomous bite that had wing-like fins on the side of its body, and would have been living in the more arid areas of Asia. And that's probably where, according to him, the idea of the dragon came from. The unicorn is probably some form of antelope, and we know from the fossil record there's an antelope called Caucasus, which in life would have presented itself as having one horn. It had two horns, but they were one behind the other, very close together. So in life, they would have been covered by a single sheath, giving this 4-footed cloven-hoofed animal that gave the appearance of a single horn.
Going on to, hopefully it's going to appear. It's not showing up. This picture, hopefully it's showing up for you. It's taking a little while to update for me.
Cryptozoology has been taken very seriously in some quarters. In the former Soviet Union, they had a thing called the Snowman Commission. That was a government-backed commission of experts to study what we call relic hominids, which may be relatives of the man that are still around today. And we can see a number of people here. Going from the left, the guy in the glasses was a Russian polymath, an absolute genius of a guy called Boris Brezhnev. And the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which I work for, has just got the rights to republish a very rare book of his, which was only in its original print run, only had about 300 copies in Russian. Next to him is Alexander Mashko. Oh, I can never say this guy's name. Mashkowstev, Alexander Mashkowstev. Try saying that 3 times fast. the other younger gentleman in glasses who just passed away just a few weeks ago, that's Dmitry Bainov, who wrote an excellent book called In the Footsteps of the Russian Snowman. Sadly just passed away. Next to him is a truly remarkable woman, half French, half Russian, called Marie-Jeanne Kaufmann. She passed away at a remarkably advanced age a couple of years ago, but she spent her entire adult life after the war on the trail of the almasty. She only ever saw it once from a distance, but she interviewed so many witnesses. And then the guy with the beard at the front, that's Peter Smolin, who was another zoologist attached to the Darwin Museum in Moscow. So the Russians took this very, very seriously, and they've just reopened the Snowman Commission now.
Our next picture is probably something which we probably had a little bit more experience with, particularly in social media. But I mean, the legends of giant squids are always out there. You have to look at Jules Verne for that. So are those pictures classified as giant squid?
Those are giant squid. That's a tiddler. The biggest one reliably measured was washed ashore at Thimble Tickle Bay in Newfoundland in the 1870s, and it was 60 feet long. The Vikings spoke of a creature called the kraken, a giant multi-armed creature that would attack ships. Now, way back in the 18th century, there was a French biologist called oh good God, what was his name? Pierre Denis de Montfort. This gentleman called Pierre Denis de Montfort, who was one of the most celebrated biologists in the entirety of the world at the time. He was an expert in mollusks. He was attached to the Natural History Museum in Paris, and he was sent all around the world on expeditions collecting mollusks and other things for the Natural History Museum. And he wrote a number of books which were very successful. And then he got to talking to whalers from Nantucket who had settled in Paris, and they told him about seeing great sucker marks on the sides of sperm whales and dying sperm whales vomiting up huge tentacles. And he came to the conclusion that there was an undiscovered species of gigantic squid. Now, as soon as he'd done that, he became a social pariah. He became a scientific pariah, rather. He lost his job. He was sneered and laughed at everywhere. He couldn't find work. He was thought of as the man who believed in sea monsters. And he was reduced to selling seashells for a living, and he died of starvation in a Parisian gutter in 1820. In 1857, he was proved right when the first giant squid was captured. And he has never, ever got the credit since then for the man who first worked out what the kraken was. He first worked out that there were indeed giant squids. He was vindicated. He was completely right, but everybody else has got the credit for this, and not Pierre Denis de Montfort, who really deserved it and was treated appallingly badly by mainstream science.
I suppose this really brings us neatly into a more broader metaphysical question, in terms of really, are some of these creatures more a case of that they just are subspecies that haven't been discovered yet, and they are just naturally occurring, we haven't classified them yet? Or is there anything supernatural about them? Now, supernatural rather than in a mystical sense, in terms of just beyond nature sense. And one could argue again with psychics and mediums that perhaps they are just naturally occurring phenomena that just haven't been classified by science yet. Would you say that most research into cryptids is actually more a case of just classifying them so that they can be just added to the whole spectrum of natural flora and fauna?
What we're dealing with true superiority, dealing with animals that are unknown to science. They are animals. There's nothing mystical or supernatural about them. They may be large, they may be bizarre looking, they may be frightening, but they are animals.
But I suppose they do suffer the same, so as you said, the gentleman was being laughed at when he was trying to classify the kraken or the kraken. So that in the same way that some people have specified these creatures, like they do currently with Bigfoot and Yeti, they think that people who've seen them and some of the interactions they've had with them are just almost comical, and they're not taken seriously. But really, it's just a question of just getting the evidence and then and classifying them.
Absolutely. We all know what a snow leopard is. We've seen them in zoos, we've seen them on television. Well, the snow leopard, it was a known species, but no one had filmed it in the wild until the 1970s. And in the early 1970s, they set out to film the snow leopard. It took them something like 6 or 7 years in the field before they got the first film of a snow leopard. That's a known animal. Now, take something like the Yeti, which seems to be a higher primate, either a great ape or a relic hominin, something that doesn't want to be found, something that recognises humans as dangerous, keeps away from it. Imagine how difficult that's going to be to film.
Your next picture, something we're all fairly familiar with.
The mountain gorilla. Now, from Central Africa, explorers heard stories of a hairy giant that lived in the mountain, and it would occasionally come down from the mountains and carry off a native girl and rape her, or it would tear a branch from a tree and beat an elephant to death. Now, of course, these stories were nonsense, but the creature behind it, the mountain gorilla, is a real animal, and the mountain gorilla wasn't discovered until 1901. It was just this hairy ogre from native folklore, and you can see a blatantly obvious analogue there with the Yeti. Bernard Heuvelmann's called this the mytholization process, where if an animal looks big and spectacular, all sorts of behavior or powers are attributed to it, but it doesn't actually do. Gorillas are not aggressive at all unless they're provoked, but because it's a big, fierce-looking animal, it has this folklore attached to it.
And moving on to your next picture, again, something we're fairly familiar with, but if not a different subspecies or genus, how would you classify that?
The okapi, that wasn't discovered until the turn of the last century. The okapi, it's a short-necked relative of the giraffe. The pygmies from the Congo jungle would talk about an animal they said was a cross between a giraffe and a zebra, and they were roundly ignored until the first okapi was discovered. And a very similar animal is known from fossils in the Middle East from 15 million years ago. So nobody guessed that this archaic short-necked giraffe was still kicking around in the Congo in Central Africa until the 1900s, completely undiscovered.
And I think you might have referenced this just a moment ago. Is that the Komodo dragon?
That's the Komodo dragon, the largest known lizard. With a venomous bite, it can grow to 10 feet long. Wasn't discovered until 1910 on a handful of Indonesian islands. And in the Pleistocene epoch, there was a much larger relative living on mainland Australia, Varanus priscus, better known as Megalania. It's known from fragmentary remains, but it seems to have been far, far larger than the Komodo dragon, perhaps up to 30 feet long, and it was preying on the megafauna of prehistoric Australia, where they had giant wombats, giant flightless ducks, giant kangaroos, and gobbling them all up was this huge bus-sized lizard, Megalania, with a venomous bite. Imagine a scaled-up Komodo dragon.
So really those maps that were said here be dragons, or monsters rather, here be monsters, are really just maybe just sort of giving indications of creatures that they had seen, which just hadn't been widely explored or classified at that point.
On New Guinea, today there are persistent reports of lizards much bigger than the Komodo dragon in the jungles of New Guinea. This fish here, what we're showing now, that's a coelacanth, and it's a deep sea fish, and it was thought to have been extinct along with the non-avian dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And that didn't turn up until 1938. It was part of a bycatch of a fisherman in South Africa, and it just so happened that on the dock that day was Dr. Marjorie Courtney Latimer, who ran a little natural history museum, and she always went down to the dock to see what fish they brought in, to see if there was anything notable she could have as a museum specimen. She saw this, didn't know what it was, made a sketch of it, had it preserved and sent the description to some ichthyologists. And one of them said it was like a bomb had gone off in my head when I saw this, because he recognised it from the fossil record as a coelacanth, a fish thought to have been extinct for 65 million years.
And then we have two, well, I would call them relatively cute creatures.
You wouldn't think that if they were going for you with their tusks. They are Chacoan peccaries, relatives of pigs. They were known from fossils from the last ice age up to 1971, when they were found alive and kicking in the Gran Chaco region of South America. And that's not a jungle area, it's an arid area with mainly cactuses and things like that. But that was knocking around there. No one had known it was there. This ice age animal still alive.
Less cute, I would argue. The two pictures, I don't know if they're showing for you, but they're not showing for me at the moment. Try again.
Yes, they're showing for me, yeah.
Oh, okay, right, I'll get back there.
Well, certainly less aggressive than the peccary. Staying in South America, this is the Amazon. And what we have here is the little black tapir or pygmy tapir. They're relatives of horses and rhinos. We're all seeing tapirs at the zoo, but this is a new species that wasn't discovered until 2013. Even more recently, on Sumatra, the Tapanuli orangutan, a large ape, a whole population of them, not discovered until 2017. The Cross River gorilla in Africa, a new type of gorilla, wasn't discovered until very recently.
And then next we have something very disturbing.
Now we're going on to the ones we were looking at just recently were examples of how large animals are still being found. Large animals, you know, that may exist in the tales of folklore from the local people and sometimes were sneered at by Westerners, turned out to be real. This is what in Mongolia is known as the Alroy Hoi Hoi. In the West, we call it the Mongolian death worm. And stories of this started to filter through to the West in the 1920s when people like the paleontologist Roy Chapman Andrews visited the area in search of fossils. And he was told of this reddish, fat, worm-like creature that would come to the surface of the Gobi Desert after rain, and it could spit a corrosive yellow saliva and generate blasts of electricity. And there are cases of camels having stepped on it and died because of being electrocuted. One geologist using a theodolite was supposed to have been electrocuted by it, and the people went in very great terror of it. Various other Westerners over the years have tried to find it after the fall of communism in Mongolia. And back in 2005, I spent 3 weeks in the Gobi looking for this creature. I didn't see it myself, but I talked to about 24 witnesses, and we went for about 1,000 miles through this bizarre alien landscape of the Gobi, which is the size of Western Europe, but has about 1 million people living in it, mainly in Ulaanbaatar and Balanzadeh. When you get out into the deep Gobi, you can go for days without seeing a sign of another human being. Parts of it are red and sandy, like the surface of Mars. Others are great swathes of chips of mica that looks like a huge mirror. Other areas look like great cat litter trays stretching off into the distance. It's a truly alien landscape. And we talked to the nomads there, and we went to a number of villages and nomad encampments and talked to the headmen and to witnesses. And they were all describing a creature looking rather like a salami or a draft excluder. They said it was scaly, brick red, rounded at both ends, so it was hard to tell which end was the head and which end was the tail. An old retired army colonel, he was one guy that had seen one. An old man had saw one back in the 1930s. Another guy saw one in his youth, told his parents, he was out tending the camels and the goats, he told his parents he'd seen one of these things, and they panicked and packed up their gear, the circular tents they had rounded up their livestock and moved out of the area. A death worm can send a whole area into a panic when someone sees it. One guy we talked to had seen one just a year before we were there. And the conclusion I came to, this isn't a worm at all, it's a reptile. It's a burrowing reptile. Now, there are two candidates. One of them is a group of reptiles called worm lizards or amphisbaenas. These are not true snakes and they're not true lizards, but they're related to both of them. And they're these sausage-shaped burrowing reptiles. And the death worm could easily be a large undiscovered species of amphisbaena. The other candidate is the sand boa, which are short, chubby, constricting snakes a few feet long that live in arid areas. There is a species called the Tartary sand boa in the Gobi, but that's grey, and the death worm is red. So if it is a sand boa, it's likely to be a new species. And when you talk to the nomads, they say that the electricity throwing lightning, they say that that's folklore, it doesn't actually do that, but they believe it can spit and it's poisonous. But no one actually saw it spitting or killing anybody. Nobody knew anybody that had been killed by one. They'd just heard third-hand stories. But a lot of people had actually seen it. And one guy had actually picked one up on the end of a stick. Another guy had seen one kill a mouse. They'd been seen crawling in and out of holes. So I think the powers attributed to the death worm are apocryphal. And they've just come about through fear. I think it's a pretty harmless form of burrowing reptile, but I think it exists.
It looks terrifying. Let's go for something which could either be considered cuter, I suppose, if you're a cat lover, although is it a dog or a cat closer to? Or
it's neither a dog or a cat, it's a marsupial.
Mongoose. It's
more closely related to numbats and Tasmanian devils than it is to a cat. Thylacine or Tasmanian wolf, and it's an example of what we call convergent or parallel evolution. That's when two animals that are not in the least bit related, often living on opposite sides of the world, evolve to resemble each other because they're filling a similar ecological niche. Now, looking at that, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was some sort of wild dog, but it's not. It's a marsupial, and it's called the Tasmanian wolf because it's an example of convergent evolution with the dog family. It has a very dog-like face, but it's a marsupial. It raises its young in a pouch. Both sexes have a pouch that faces backwards that the female carried their young in, and the male used to protect their testicles. They have very wide jaws. You can see that one there's yawning. The gape is much wider than that of a wolf or a dog, and the jaws were much more powerful than a wolf or a dog. They had a much greater bite force, but the skull was not as well designed for holding onto struggling prey. So wolves hunt in packs and they bite onto their prey and worry it and pull it down like that. Whereas the Tasmanian wolf, the thylacine, probably bit the prey with one big devastating bite and then let it bleed to death and then ate it. Now,
yes,
it's found throughout New Guinea and Australia and Tasmania, but it's thought that the introduction of the dingo put it under pressure on the mainland because dingoes can breed faster. They're no match for a thylacine in a one-on-one fight, but they move in packs, they can breed faster, so it may be out-competed on the mainland. But on Tasmania, dingoes were never introduced, and we know that thylacines lived there well into the 20th century. When the white settlers first went over to Tasmania, they started hunting the thylacine because they thought it was taking their sheep. And there were several bounties put on it where money was paid for thylacine carcasses, and they were they were snared and shot and poisoned and generally persecuted. The last known one died in Hobart Zoo in 1936, but since then there have been over 4,000 sightings of thylacines, including one by a park ranger and one by a zoologist. I've been over there, 3 times now and talked to witnesses. I'm sure that the Tasmanian wolf is still existing in Tasmania and possibly on New Guinea as well. Very intriguing reports of this striped dog-like animal that they call the dobsonga in the mountains of New Guinea that preys on livestock, and people won't hunt it because it's taboo to be hunted. So it's often called the healthiest extinct animal you'll ever meet.
I've moved us on because we've still got quite a few slides to go. This rather fearsome looking snake. Now, surely most snakes have been discovered now. There can't be anything new in terms of dimensions.
But here we've got a different type of cryptid. Cryptids can come in different types. We can have things like the death worm. These are 3 examples, actually. Things like the death worm, where it's totally unknown to science. Things like the Tasmanian wolf, where it's an animal we know existed, we think is extinct, but may still be around. Now, this 3rd type of cryptid is a known animal that we know still exists, but one which has grown much, much bigger than the textbooks say it should. In this case, it's the giant anaconda. The biggest measured anaconda is something like 27 feet long. There are persistent reports from the jungles of South America of anacondas 40, 50, and even 60 feet long. Now, anacondas, the females don't lay eggs, they give birth to live young, like all members of the boa family. So they don't have to crawl out onto land to lay their eggs, they can stay in water, boiled up by the water, and get bigger and bigger and bigger. Nobody knows exactly how long they live or how big they get. But in an undisturbed area where there's plenty of prey and the creature is growing and growing and growing, there's no functional reason you couldn't have a snake 40, 50, 60 feet long. And these reports keep rolling in from the jungles of South America of these huge snakes.
It does look enormous. Now, something which, well, we're probably, I won't even comment on it. What would you say that picture was representing?
That is a representation of the orangutan deck, or the short man. This is a primate reported from the jungles of Western Sumatra, which is an island in Indonesia. It's been reported since the Dutch colonial times. And I've been over to Sumatra now 5 times on the trail of this animal. I've heard it calling in the jungle. I've found its handprints and its footprints. My colleague Dave Archer and our native guide Sahar Dimas both saw the creature clinging to a tree, and Dave described it as having a strikingly human looking face, thick shaggy hair, rather like a mountain gorilla, about the size of a chimpanzee, very broad chested, muscular, and it got down from the tree and walked away on its hind legs. We've also found hair from this animal that has been analysed by Lars Thomas from Copenhagen University. He's an expert in mammal hair, and he says that he's related to but distinct from the Sumatran orangutan, and he's forced to conclude that there is a large unknown species of primate in Western Sumatra. Even the head of the Indonesian Tiger Conservation Group, Debbie Marta, has seen this creature. She originally came to Sumatra just as a tourist, heard these stories, thought nothing of it until she actually saw one. And then she stayed in Sumatra and was on the trail of this creature for years and saw it another 3 times. And she stayed on it in Sumatra to work, trying to save the endangered Sumatran tiger.
I'm going to move us on to this very bizarre photograph.
That's a drawing, not a photograph. That
right.
is
Yes.
another illustration of the Mongolian death worm, which we were talking about earlier on. Probably my favourite of all the expeditions I've done. I really want to go back to Mongolia. It is such a beautiful and mysterious place. But as I said, that the stories of this all dovetail. Wherever you go in Mongolia, the people that have seen it are describing the same animal. And it's generally seen coming out after rain and basking in the sun. The old retired army colonel we talked to at an old army base, he said he'd seen one when he was out on patrol once when he was younger on a motorbike. And it was just after rain, and the creature's scales were glistening with the rain, giving it a sparkling effect. He thinks that's where the folklore of the electricity comes from, the sparkling effect it has when its scales get wet. But it engenders deep terror in people. They're very frightened of it.
I have to say, I mean, that is a very odd looking thing. Brought Lara back in. At some point, because I cropped that picture, I have to say that my cropping made them look quite odd, suggestive perhaps. So at some point, Lara, you've had an experience where you potentially saw something.
Well, I'm kind of lucky because my dad took me to the pictures when I was about 11-year-old to see the film on the Yeti, you know, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Right, so I kind of had an uploading right from then, right? So I've got a fundamental, you know, when I saw that footage as an impressionable child, right, it kind of shaped, you could probably arguably say it partially shaped me into the person that I am today, you know, because I have this natural sort of accepting and understanding. As a medium, I'm very adept in knowing that there's otherworldly beings anyway, right? It's just a matter of changing your focus or shifting your mind to allow your mind to see other things. But when I was doing an event once up in Stirling, packed out event, I had an assistant with me as well, so it wasn't just me. And I did try and get her on for today, Jonathan, but unfortunately she's working she's down south. But I'm kind of hoping in a future episode that she can come on with us, because it is good to have backup at these things, Richard. It wasn't just me. And we drove off from, it was the Glasgow Carlisle road, right? And we came off at Moffat. And it was a nice sunny day. There was no stress. I was in a convertible, you know, roof down and that. And I wasn't even driving fast. You know, I was probably doing about maybe 45, 50 mile an hour because I'd just come off the main road onto the B road towards Dumfries. And then on the right-hand side, there was what appeared to be a very large, hairy-looking animal. And, you know, when you're kind of driving along and as you get closer, right, there's that, when your eyes see it and then your mind registers it, right? And I'm like, oh my God, that's actually a very strange looking hairy animal, right? And then it was as we got closer, I'm like, what the fuff, right? You know, because my mind had by that time gone, Lara, we can't categorize this. This is something that's not fitting in with the norm of what you would expect to see. And it was, all I can explain is it was a cross between, because it was, I mean, I said to Jonathan and Nori yesterday, it was kind of like a lynx cat, but much bigger, right? It had stripes and it had spots and it had pointy ears. I mean, listen to me. I sound like I'm a kid trying to describe seeing the animal for the first time. I remember coming back and seeing, looking it up, you know, on the computer. I couldn't find anything other than an animal that looked vaguely familiar that was in South Africa, right? That was part of the lynx family. That's why I said it was a lynx, but it looked like a cross between a bear and a lynx. It was very hairy, had stripes, it had spots. And as we were driving past, I slowed right down and I looked, without looking at you, I was still looking, and I said to my friend Jackie, I said, do you think I should stop and go back? She went, no. I said, you did see that too, didn't you? It wasn't just me. And she said, yes, I saw it. Keep driving, she said. And there had been reports, you see, of a beast that had been savaging a lot of the sheep and animals across fields between certain roads. It was a massive space, you know, this animal was covering. But to this day, I'm still finding it in my mind kind of unidentified. I'm looking at all these slides, Richard, can I just say, and I'm even looking in some of the stuff and the footage that we've got of whether there's a kind of connection with what I've actually seen. I don't actually know how that animal would have got there. I don't know how well. It's obviously surviving on feeding off other animals. There were reports in the paper periodically, nothing consistent, and certainly nothing, because I don't read the paper that often. I certainly wouldn't buy into it. It was the fact that I wasn't the only one that saw it. There were two of us who saw it. Do you have any idea what it could have been?
It sounds like some form of exotic cat. Possibly a lynx, or possibly a hybrid, because different types of cat can hybridize, we know that. And it's not impossible that it's a lynx hybrid or a jungle cat hybrid. There's a cat called a jungle cat that lives in India and the Middle East. It's very lynx-like, and we know that can hybridize with domestic cats and make some very strange-looking hybrids.
I mean, it was large, very large, probably the size of a miniature pony, like a horse, like a pony. You know, like maybe a 10-hand pony. It was huge.
Something like a little Shetland pony or something like that. Bigger than a Shetland, because Shetland you can get the miniatures. I would say it was probably, no, I would say about 12 hands. Right, I'm used to looking at horses, right? I would say it was easily about 12 hands. It was that big. It was huge. What's a hand? What's that in feet
4
and inches?
inches.
Is it 12 inches?
A hand is 4 inches.
Oh, it's that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Interestingly, the next slide almost matches your description.
Wow.
Was it?
It had spots in its face, right? I didn't see stripes in the back. That it had big, stocky arms, like bear arms, but at the front.
But I also did have this picture, and of course, you wouldn't ever go, "Well, I saw this strange stripy cat thing, didn't identify,"
because you would
know what that.
exactly.
Yeah, you'd know what that was.
Yeah.
But it's almost like we need an identikit on animals.
The first one of those is the Tasmanian wolf, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Which I think is still around in Tasmania and New Guinea. The second one is the Caspian tiger. And the Caspian tiger lived in Central Asia up until the 1960s, when it was supposedly hunted into extinction. A couple of years ago, 2018, I was in the Romit Valley in Tajikistan in Central Asia, and I was looking for relic hominins. But a lot of the people we were talking to, as well as seeing these wild ape-like creatures, they said it was that they'd seen tigers as well. A lot of hunters said they'd seen them, that had their kills stolen by tigers. Farmers had said the tigers had broken into their stockades and carried away livestock. 2 guys said they'd seen females with cubs. We talked to mullahs at a mosque in the Romit Valley, many of whom said they'd seen these things. And most interestingly, we talked to a park ranger, a wildlife ranger there, and he had seen a tiger from only about 100 feet away just a month before we were there. That's an animal we know existed. It's supposed to be extinct, but there seem to be populations of them hanging on in the Romit Valley. And when I got back to England, I wrote to every single tiger conservation group I could find online and gave them this information, and only one of them had the decency to write back to me, and they said, "Oh, this is interesting, but we only deal with the Siberian tiger." Nobody was interested.
Good Lord. Did you see Gail? Gail remembers when that happened, and she's also seen something, and it was Dumfries to Brampton. Brampton is actually just off that main road, but lower down from where I saw it, probably about 20 miles.
So very long description from Gail about this, something that was black, bigger than a German Shepherd. Noticed the tail was long and slim, but not like a dog's tail. So very much like the cat, the Tasmanian devil one.
That's a pretty accurate description of a black leopard, a panther. Most of the big cats in Britain.
The one I saw did not look like a panther. I know what a panther looks like, right? However, that one that Gail's talking about, there were reports of people seeing a panther across the fields, right? That went on for a good couple of years anyway.
So a lot of these... Sorry, Richard.
Most of the reports in Britain are of black leopards, panthers, or pumas, which are the brown American big cat, or European lynx. There are the 3 main ones. Well, the thing you saw, the description is like a lynx, but the size is much greater than a lynx.
Yes. And that's the part that didn't fit in with me. When I did my research, I got to as far as it looked like a type of lynx. And I'm thinking that it was maybe a hybrid that had crossbred with something. And that's what I saw. It was a crossbred, lynx with something else.
Well, usually when exotic cats cross, they cross with things that are of a similar size. So in captivity, you can get lions and tigers crossing, like lidons or tigers and tigons. You have been cases of leopards and pumas crossing in captivity, but with something like a tiger or a lion, if they came across a lynx, they'd probably eat it rather than try and mate with it because of the massive size.
I know.
One thing that hasn't...
Maybe it was a vegetarian.
Big cats do. Big cats do. Smaller cats. It's well known. One thing that's intrigued me over the years is reports of giant animals. And I'm particularly interested in reports of giant anacondas and giant pythons, but also giant crocodiles. there are reports of massive crocodiles, bigger than anything known to science from around the world. And I've postulated that maybe there's some genetic quirk that some of these things have, where in a population you will get a freakishly large individual every so often. What causes this, I don't know, but it seems to be in known species you will get a giant individual every now and again.
It happens in all species, doesn't it? You will get an
Yeah,
anomaly with humans.
Yeah, when they've got a problem with their pituitary gland or whatever, you know, it makes them like a giant version of that, doesn't it?
Yes, but particularly with reptiles, if they're in an undisturbed area, and they live very long anyway, and they continue to grow throughout their lives, if they're in an undisturbed area with lots of food, there's no reason they can't get enormously big. Now, take, for instance, eels, which are fish, obviously. It wasn't discovered how they bred until relatively recently. All the eels you catch in fresh water have no sexual organs whatsoever, and they don't sexually develop until they're very old. And this can differ from place to place. And some eels can live for over 100 years, but when they're ready to breed, they'll swim from freshwater to saltwater, and the European eel goes to the Sargasso Sea.
Wow.
And it's thought that they navigate by magnetic fields and possibly by scent as well. They'll breed and then die, and the baby eels, which are called elvers has left the building, swim back to the ancestral waters, and then it all goes around again with the cycle again. But occasionally you get ones that don't sexually develop. It's been postulated that these eunuch eels can grow to immense sizes because they just stay in fresh water and they never go out to sea and breed. They never sexually develop and just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Not 2004, a group of Canadian scientists, Canadian tourists, reported seeing an eel in Loch Ness that was 25 feet long. So that makes more sense than some sort of prehistoric monster living in Loch Ness.
Yeah.
I'd like us to move back to the humanoid cryptodes and cryptozoology, because we've got about 10 minutes left. So we've got this creature that's propped up between myself and Lara. So Lara, any experience with the hairy beast?
Oh my God, I felt like that at times, so I've got to say I have. Who hasn't? Who hasn't?
Richard, would you like to explain who this is?
That is a reconstruction of Homo erectus. Now, the almasty, which we mentioned earlier, in the early days of the Snowman Commission back in the 50s, they thought it might be a relic surviving form of Neanderthal. But we now know that Neanderthal man is not that different from us. If you got a Neanderthal, shaved him, washed him, put him in a suit, he could walk down any street in Britain and no one would really bat an eyelid. They might think, God, that guy's a bit ugly, but they think that about me. They weren't that good. They were highly advanced. They used fire. It's been discovered that they made art. They wore clothes. They weren't that different to us. And they had very big noses. They were quite short. The biggest ones were only about 5'8", the very biggest ones. But they had very large noses. Not at all like the reports of the almasty, which is something much bigger, 7.5 feet, very flat nose, thick brow ridge, primitive. That's something different. That picture you've got there. That's not an almasty.
So what are we now looking at then?
Well, let's finish with the almasty first.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
The almasty, it's more human-like than the Yeti. It's smaller than the Yeti. It's more human-like, but it's clearly not a modern human. So one of the theories is that it's an early offshoot of either Homo erectus or Homo habilis. We know Homo erectus left Africa and it evolved into Neanderthal man and modern man and a number of different species. But just recently we found that the much more primitive Homo habilis also left Africa, and that was the ancestor of Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, and a new species that has yet to be named from China. So it has this lineage coming out of Africa that we didn't know about. So it could have evolved into all sorts of things. So we think the almasty is a descendant of one of these creatures. Now back to the other one. that we just showed a minute ago, that is the Yeti. Much bigger, up to 3 meters tall. Once again, has primitive tool use. It can hurl rocks or swing a club, but it doesn't use fire. Much more ape-like, much more bestial. I was in northern India on the trail of the Yeti, which has many different names. And this creature in northern India is known as the Mande Barung, the forest man. And the witnesses were describing an animal that looked very like a gorilla that's standing on its hind legs, about 3 meters tall, black fur. There's quite a difference from place to place in the fur of the Yeti. In China, where it's known as the Yeren, it's very sort of reddish colour. In Nepal and Tibet, it tends to be dark brown, and in northern India, it's black. But you get that colour difference in known animals anyway, within their ranges. The Yeti is never white. The Yeti is a fallacy. It comes from a mistranslation of the Sino-Tibetan name Miko Kangme, which means abominable man of the rocks. Mistranslated as abominable man of the snows. And that's why we get the totally fallacious idea of a white Yeti. I've seen the footprints of these creatures along the jungle stream in northern India. I've talked to witnesses that are describing this 3 meter tall animal looking very like a gorilla. And one guy said he saw it making a nest, the way that gorillas make nests. He saw it making this great nest in the forest floor. He was looking at it from a hill, looking down on it. Another guy saw a female feeding on bamboo while it suckled a young. Many people had seen them and said that it did a sort of threat display, shaking the bushes and bellowing in the same way that gorillas do when they want to scare people off. They're very frightened of it because it's big and strong and powerful looking, but it doesn't seem to be particularly aggressive. Much like a gorilla, it'll do a threat display, but it doesn't actually physically attack people unless severely provoked. We do know there was a giant ape that lived in India and Vietnam and other parts of Asia called Gigantopithecus, and it's known from teeth and jaw bones. And it was considerably bigger than the largest gorilla, and due to the shape of the jaws, it's been postulated that it walked around on its hind legs rather than on all fours like a gorilla, and that may be the ancestor of the Yeti. Now, what we've got here is an illustration I took with me to Tajikistan. I mentioned earlier about going to look for a creature called the ghoul in Tajikistan, and we unearth these stories of the Caspian tiger. You get that a lot when you go somewhere looking for one animal. You'll hear stories about another. When we were looking for the giant anaconda, we heard stories about an undiscovered race of pygmies and a creature called the water tiger. We took a lot of sort of illustrations of Bigfoot and other mystery creatures with us, other mystery apes and hominins, and pictures of known species of apes and reconstructions of prehistoric hominins. And the witnesses in Tajikistan all pointed out that this is the one that looked most like the ghoul. It's quite different from the almasty, quite different from the Yeti. They said it was about 5.5 feet tall, so not huge, more like the orang pendek in size. It had very long arms, and the first thing when they talk about when they're describing the ghoul is the shape of the hand and the thumb. If you were going to make up a story about a monster, you're not going to say, the first thing you're going to say it had weird thumbs. They say the thumbs are much further back on the hand than a human's are, making the palm area of the hand much longer than it is in a human's. And that's more like the hand structure of a chimpanzee, which indicates something very primitive, much more primitive than Homo erectus or Homo habilis, something more related to something possibly like Ardipithecus, which was a very early Australopithecine relative. So the whole hand structure there is pointing at something much more primitive than an almasty, and it seems to be quite aggressive. It will hurl rocks and it will attack people, much more aggressive than the almasty. Bones. Someone's saying, why are bones?
Yes, Natalie's asked about why have no bones been found, but in fact, some of what you were saying, isn't that because of genetic testing in the bones?
Well, the reason why bones haven't been found is that bones get devoured very quickly, particularly in forest environments. The flesh will get eaten off a carcass within days, and the bones will get broken down by things like rodents, which gnaw them for the calcium. So unless it's in a very anaerobic conditions, like deep in a cave, or it's frozen in a glacier or something, bones are very rare. Hunters in North America, they say they virtually never see the bones of bears, and we know that there are loads and loads of bears. Also, you've got to remember a lot of where these creatures used to live may now be underwater because of changing sea levels from the last ice age.
We've got a question about apes in a film called Skullduggery and a film called Boggy Creek.
Skullduggery,
What's the question?
Heard of.
I don't know if they're actually questions, actually.
Boggy Creek is a great film made in the early 70s, and it's about the skunk ape, the southern subspecies of Sasquatch, which lives in the swamps. That there, we were just looking at, is actually an illustration of a skunk ape from Ken Gerard's excellent book. The skunk ape is similar to the Sasquatch, but more slender, and it lives in this semi-tropical environment in the swamps. The beast of Boggy Creek was one of these creatures which turned up in the early 70s, terrified a load of people around a small town in Arkansas, and then disappeared as mysteriously as it turned up. And this film was made, it was a sort of docudrama, and it actually had interviews with real witnesses in it, interspersed with bits where they did recreations. And it's very understated, very creepy. It's knocking around on YouTube if you want to see it. It's one of the best films on Bigfoot ever made, and it was done on a micro budget, but it was done really well, and it was a huge success.
So, I mean, Lara, apart from the creature that you saw, have you ever seen any other types of creature?
I've seen one of the British big cats. I've seen a puma in Devon, wild in Devon. I've seen the tracks and the handprints of the orang pendek. I've heard it calling. I've seen the tracks of the Yeti, and I saw the monster of Martin Mere. And Martin Mere is a lake in Lancashire, part of a wildfowl reserve. It used to be the biggest lake in England, but it was drained in medieval times, and now it's just a couple of acres. But it's a wildfowl reserve. We went up to investigate sightings of a creature that was said to be the size of a car and was pulling down swans and geese. And when I saw this little lake, I thought, I very much doubt if anything can live in that undiscovered. And then, half an hour later, I saw the creature come to the surface, thrashing about on the surface, and it was a huge catfish. It was a Wells catfish, about 8 feet long. And these were a continental species introduced into Britain by a group called the Acclimatization Society, a bunch of Victorian nutters who tried to take foreign animals and introduce them into the British countryside. Some of them were a success, some of them weren't. And the Wells catfish was one that was a success. They can reach 16 feet long. So if you saw one of those in a lake where you didn't know there was one, you weren't expecting to see it, it would be a monster in your mind.
Have you ever seen anything like a Bigfoot, any of the large humanoid forms, hominids?
Closest I got to was the almasty in Russia. We were staking out an old abandoned farmhouse about 3 miles outside of a little village called Neutrino in the Caucasus Mountains, and it consisted of 3 rooms with an L-shaped veranda going around it. And it had been abandoned since the early 70s, but occasionally shepherds hung out on there. And a few years before, these shepherds had been on the veranda, and they said the door at the end of the veranda opened. This creature came onto the veranda, 7 foot tall, hairy, man-like creature, walked along the veranda, moved one of them out of the way. It wasn't aggressive, just pushed him out of the way and jumped to the end of the veranda. So we were staking it out. One of the guys we were with, an archaeologist called Anatoly Serendenko, had seen an almasty in the general vicinity of this old farmhouse. We set up camera traps and were baited with meat and fruit. And the almasty is supposed to make a twittering noise like a bird. A lot of the witnesses say it will twitter, make twittering noises like a bird. And about 10 o'clock at night, we heard this twittering noise. There were no birds about. There was a twittering noise. One of the camera traps went up. And I thought, good Lord, can that be? Well, I think it might be. But then nothing happened until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And we went back into one of these little rooms to get warm around this stove. And one of my mates, Dave Archer, who's the guy that saw the orangutan deck, he fell asleep on this manky old mattress in there. Myself and another cryptozoologist called Adam Davis were warming ourselves around this stove, and the door was slightly ajar. And the door to this room was a tall door, it was about 7 foot. It was slightly ajar, and there was moonlight and starlight coming in. Then we hear a deep guttural vocalization, sort of boom, 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 boom noise. But it sounds like something with very big lungs, very big chest was making a noise. And I said to Adam, "Did you hear that?" He said, "Yeah." Then about 25 seconds later, something walks along the veranda. Whatever that something was, it was on 2 legs, because when it passed by the door, it blocked out the moonlight and the starlight to a height of 7 foot plus. And I said to Adam, "It's out there on the veranda." We grab our cameras, rush out. Whatever it was had disappeared back into the night. So we did a circuit of the farm and the outbuildings. We found nothing. And in the morning, we checked the cameras. All we got was vegetation being moved about. So was that an almasty? Did I come within 12 feet of an almasty? I don't know. It wasn't a bear. A bear would have made more noise. It was too tall to be a man. It was up on 2 legs. That's all I can say.
Brilliant. That is absolutely fascinating. Richard, thank you so much for coming on today and talking through the fascinating subject of cryptids. There are some very scary creatures out there. And as you have shown, there are probably going to be even more discovered as we carry on exploring all those random parts of the world. And probably out in the seas, I would imagine that's the next frontier, is the deep water creatures that we might be finding.
Oh, absolutely. We've already seen the giant squid, and consistent reports of sea serpents since the times of ancient Babylon. So there's something there to be addressed.
Fantastic. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. If you want any more information about Richard, if you go onto the Supernatural magazine, we put a post up about some articles he's written for us, and you can find out more details about him there. So Richard, have a good week, and hopefully we'll see you again on another future broadcast.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye.
Wasn't that fascinating?
That was fascinating, yeah. It was. I didn't know there were so many strange big beasts.
I think those death worms are the ones that really I found quite disturbing.
Well, Nat in there said she saw a 6-foot rat.
With a long straw coming out of its nose. I mean, there are some scary things out there.
Oh, no.
Especially on a Saturday night in a lot of the pubs.
That's right, exactly.
So we are rapidly running out of time, but next week we have a very special guest joining us. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, what can I say? And I just found out he's been in Facebook jail, so he has, bless him. The fabulous John Spratt is with us next week, everybody. And you know what? I think he might just be waiting in the wings because we've got a competition coming up. John!
There he is.
You're there.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm good. I've been sitting backstage, ears glued, listening to what was going on in the show. Interesting, eh?
Wow, I swear to God, John grew 3 inches. Well, we were actually going through it all, I think, because I don't think even Jonathan understood. Like, you didn't realise there was so many big hairy beasts, did you, out there, and so many.
There's a lot of very scary beasts out there.
Yeah, and so next week we have got something a bit different again, haven't we? We've got the fabulous John Spratt, who's going to be talking about a zillion sets of tarot cards. Right? You're going to be talking about tarot, aren't you? And we're also going to be having a wee competition to win a free tarot reading live with John on Supernatural page next week. All right. So what do we have to do for the competition? Is it the amount of people that's sharing the video?
Whatever you want to do. Yeah, should we do that? More to share.
I'm thinking that as well, right? So guys, those of you who are on, right, get the word out. We're going to be posting out as well. We'll be counting the amount of shares, right, for the video, for this video, or for the advert of John being on next week, because that'll be up as well, won't it?
It will.
Right, so we'll count shares, and the person that does the most shares will be selected to win for a free reading with John Spratt next week. All right, which will send you the link and you come on live. So you've got to agree to come on live to do this within that hour.
Perfect.
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 Lovely.
Did you wolf your dinner down, did you?
I did. I wolfed it down because I came on and Lara's like, oh, come on, the last couple of minutes just so we could get ready for next week. And I'm like, I'm feeding the kids. So I was like, wolf it down. And then,
I bet that was a sight. So you were relaxing, just going into the food, and then suddenly you were devouring it. It must have been quite fun.
It was a nice slow cook that was going on. I was making some toasties, and then it became, right, let's do this quickly. So we turned the toasty maker up a bit higher, made it to burn the toast a bit more. Mine was a bit soggy, but I made it.
Of course you made it. Of course, and we're really grateful for that as well. It's fabulous you came on, showed a presence, let everybody know that you'll be on next week. And I was just thinking this morning, God, John's been really quiet. What's going on? I thought I'm going to message him later, and then suddenly you came up in the comment and said, I'm here. I'm out of Facebook jail. I was like, I thought you were quiet.
I don't know what I did, but my Facebook and my Instagram, because the two of them are linked, both of them told me I was banned for violating some rules until the 3rd of July. It's now the 8th of July, and I only got my ban lifted today. I don't know what I did, because I haven't been online.
Oh.
Well, that's very strange indeed. It's not just a strange beast. It looks like we've got some strange shenanigans going on virtually as well. Good
Bigfoot
Lord.
is in Facebook.
It's no coincidence that the Facebook jail was lifted and you were able to come on Supernatural Magazine. There you go. Just in time.
That's just in time, see? Things
That's
work for a
That
reason.
happened. Yeah. All right then. So everybody's looking forward to seeing you next week, John. Really massive thanks for coming on and just showing everybody your wonderful face and your wonderful presence, and just give them something to look forward to next week. And Jonathan's having a day off, aren't you?
I am. No, I might. I've got an unopened pack of tarot cards, so I might have a go myself.
Oh, well, please
yes.
do. Oh my God! See, now he's got him frothing at the mouth. You mentioned tarot cards, and the next he is.
I've never opened them. I've had them for like 10 years.
Oh wow! Do you know what type they are?
I do that look when someone asks me what type.
I find them fair. I think they might be Egyptian looking.
Roughly. Okay then. Right. Okay. That's it. He'll be doing his homework for next week now. He'll be able to identify these cards before we're back on. But I've just realised Aries men.
Sorry?
Both Aries men.
Oh.
The best.
Look at that. They both did it at the same time as well. Look at that. Of course they're the best. What can I say? All right, guys. Thank you so much, John, for coming on with us this week. Can't wait until we do the tarot thing next week.
I'm excited.
I know. You're going to have to look out all those sets of cards now. We won't be seeing you for sets of cards.
I might have to put myself back in Facebook jail just to get them all out.
I know. I can't wait to see your cards, Jonathan.
Yes, when I can find them. I did put them somewhere. I thought, well, I'll dig them out, and I can't remember where I've put them now, so I will find them.
Great stuff. No problem. Okay then, guys. That's us for this week. Yep.
Have a lovely week.
Have a fabulous week. Take care. Bye-bye for now.
Care.
Bye.
Bye.